The crystalline spires of Celestia Prime pierced the violet atmosphere like needles of pure starlight, their surfaces reflecting the glory of 10,000 suns that illuminated the capital world of the Intergalactic Empire. From the observation deck of the Grand Admiralty Tower, Fleet Admiral Lysander Thorne gazed upon a vista that represented the culmination of 3 millennia of expansion, conquest, and enlightenment. The Empire stretched across 47 galaxies, encompassing over 2 million inhabited systems and countless more that served as resource nodes, strategic outposts, or scientific research stations. Each world contributed to the magnificent tapestry of civilization that had grown from humanity's humble origins on a small blue planet in what was now known as the Terra sector. Thorne's reflection was interrupted by the soft chime of his neural interface. The incoming message carried the highest encryption protocols, indicating its origin from the Umbral Division, the Empire's most secretive intelligence organization. "Admiral," came the voice of Director Cassandra Vex, her tone carrying an unusual edge of urgency. "We need to speak. Immediately. Quantum Channel 77 Alpha." Thorne frowned, his weathered features creasing with concern. In his 40 years of service, he had rarely heard such tension in Vex's voice. The director was legendary for her composure, even when delivering news of galactic significance. "On my way," he replied, already moving toward the secure communication chamber. The quantum channel established a connection that transcended normal space-time limitations, creating a bubble of isolated reality where even the most sensitive information could be shared without fear of interception. As the chamber's walls shimmered and transformed into the stark environment of Vex's office aboard the intelligence flagship Prometheus, Thorne found himself face to face with a woman whose silver hair and pale eyes belied her chronological age of 130 years. "Lysander," she began without preamble. "We have a problem. A significant one." Vex gestured, and holographic displays materialized around them, showing stellar maps, energy signatures, and intercepts of communications that appeared to originate from the void between galaxies. 6 months ago, our deep space monitoring stations began detecting anomalous quantum fluctuations in Sector Null, the empty region beyond the Andromeda Spiral. Initially, we classified these as natural phenomena, possibly the birth of a new stellar nursery or the collapse of an ancient black hole cluster. The displays zoomed in on a region of space that appeared empty to conventional sensors but pulsed with strange, dark energy patterns when viewed through quantum-enhanced detection arrays. 3 weeks ago, Agent Nix, one of our best deep-cover operatives, managed to penetrate the outer perimeter of whatever was generating these signals. What she discovered changes everything we thought we knew about the cosmos. A new image appeared, a massive structure that defied easy description. It seemed to exist partially in normal space and partially in some other dimension, its architecture flowing and organic yet clearly artificial. Dark energy coursed through its surfaces like veins of corrupted starlight. "This is Umbro's sanctum," Vex continued, her voice dropping to almost a whisper. "A cathedral fortress constructed from materials that shouldn't exist according to our understanding of physics. It's the size of a small moon, and it's been hidden in dimensional fold space for longer than our empire has existed." Thorne studied the image, his tactical mind automatically analyzing potential weaknesses and strategic implications. "Who built it? That's where it gets interesting, and terrifying." Vex manipulated the display, revealing recordings of figures moving within the structure. They were humanoid but wrong in ways that made the eye struggle to focus on them. Their robes seemed to absorb light rather than reflect it, and their movements carried an otherworldly grace that suggested they operated according to different physical laws. They called themselves the Void Priests, servants of something they refer to as the Supreme Darkness. According to the intelligence Nix gathered before her cover was blown, they've been planning something called the Great Convergence, an event that will supposedly merge our reality with theirs and place them in dominion over all existence. "Religious fanatics," Thorne observed, though his tone suggested he suspected there was more to it. "Perhaps, but fanatics with technology that makes our most advanced systems look primitive. They've somehow learned to manipulate the fundamental forces that hold reality together. Dark matter, dark energy, quantum foam, They treat these things like children playing with building blocks. Vex brought up another display, this one showing a timeline of recent events. Nix's final transmission before we lost contact contained details of their invasion plan. They'd been constructing what they call shadow fleets, ships that exist partially outside normal space-time, making them nearly impossible to detect and virtually immune to our weapons. Timeline? Based on their internal communications, the first wave launches in 72 hours. They're targeting our core systems, Celestia Prime, the manufacturing centers in the Rigel cluster, and the strategic command nodes in the Vega expansion. If they succeed in crippling our command structure, the rest of the Empire will fall like dominoes. Thorn absorbed this information, his mind already shifting into strategic planning mode. What do we know about their capabilities? Numbers? Technology? Limited data, but what we have is disturbing. Their ships appear to phase in and out of our dimension at will. Conventional weapons pass right through them when they're partially phased, but they can solidify long enough to deliver devastating attacks. We've identified at least 3 different ship classes: Wraith-class destroyers about the size of our cruisers, Spectre-class battleships comparable to our dreadnoughts, and something they call Nightmare-class world killers that dwarf even our largest vessels. Estimated fleet strength. Conservative estimate? 300 ships in the first wave alone. But Lysander. Vex paused, meeting his eyes directly. This isn't just about military conquest. The intelligence suggests they plan to perform some kind of ritual during the invasion, something that will permanently alter the fabric of space-time in this region of the universe. If they succeed, there may be no way to reverse the damage. Thorn stood silent for a long moment, processing the implications. The Empire had faced external threats before: rival species, rogue AI networks, even the occasional interdimensional incursion. But this was different. This wasn't about territory or resources. It was about the fundamental nature of reality itself. What does the Emperor know? He's been briefed on the basic threat assessment. The full details. Vex hesitated. The full details might cause panic throughout the core worlds. We're walking a fine line between necessary preparation and mass hysteria. Recommendations? We implement Protocol Omega immediately. Full military mobilization, but disguised as routine defense exercises. Activate all sleeper assets in the Outer Rim territories. And, she paused again, we need to consider the unthinkable. Which is? The archive protocols. If we can't stop them conventionally, we may need to activate the reality anchors. Thorn's blood ran cold. The reality anchors were a theoretical last resort, devices that could stabilize local spacetime at the cost of creating permanent dead zones where nothing could exist. They had been developed during the dimensional wars 2 centuries ago but never deployed due to their catastrophic side effects. How long do we have to prepare? 72 hours until their first wave reaches our outer detection grid. Maybe 96 hours until they hit the core worlds. Not enough time for a conventional mobilization. Then we don't go conventional. Thorn's expression hardened with resolve. Activate the Shadow Fleet. Vex raised an eyebrow. The Empire's own Shadow Fleet was its most closely guarded secret, a collection of experimental vessels that incorporated captured and reverse-engineered technologies from a dozen different species. Officially, it didn't exist. All of them? Every ship, every weapon, every secret project we've been keeping in the vault. If they want to fight dirty, we'll show them what dirty really looks like. The Strategic Command Center deep beneath Celestia Prime had been designed to coordinate military operations across multiple galaxies simultaneously. Its quantum-linked displays could show real-time tactical information from battlefields separated by millions of light-years, while its AI-assisted planning systems could process thousands of strategic scenarios in microseconds. Today, it felt claustrophobic. Admiral Thorn stood at the center of the circular chamber, surrounded by holographic displays that painted a picture of desperate preparation. Red indicators blinked across the star maps, showing fleet movements and defensive positions as the Empire's military machine lurched into motion with unprecedented speed. Status report, he commanded, his voice cutting through the controlled chaos of the command center. Outer Rim fleets are moving to intercept positions, reported Captain Elena Vasquez, the Empire's chief strategic coordinator. We've managed to disguise the mobilization as Exercise Golden Shield, but intelligence suggests the enemy may not be fooled. Shadow Fleet status? Admiral Thorne, came a new voice from the chamber's entrance. General Marcus Kane, commander of the Empire's Special Operations Forces, strode into the room with characteristic directness. His scarred face and cybernetic left arm bore testimony to decades of classified missions. Shadow Fleet is mobilizing. 12 vessels operational, 3 more coming online within the next 6 hours. 15 ships against 300? Thorne's question carried no judgment, only tactical assessment. 15 very special ships, Kane replied. The Phantom utilizes hegemony cloaking technology, completely invisible to all known detection methods. The Paradox carries temporal manipulation devices recovered from the Chronos incident. The Void Walker. He paused. Incorporates dimensional phase technology similar to what the enemy appears to be using. Thorne nodded. Each Shadow Fleet vessel represented years of research and development, incorporating the most exotic technologies the Empire had encountered in its expansion across the galaxies. They were powerful beyond measure but also dangerous. Many of their systems were barely understood, held together more by engineering intuition than scientific certainty. And our other preparations? Director Vex materialized as a hologram beside them, her image transmitted from the intelligence vessel Prometheus. Psychological operations are in full swing. We're spreading disinformation about our military capabilities while simultaneously preparing the civilian population for what we're calling emergency defense exercises. The reality anchor stations are being activated and calibrated. How many? 12 stations positioned at strategic points throughout the core systems. Each one capable of creating a reality stabilization field roughly 1 light-year in diameter. If activated simultaneously. She trailed off, the implications clear. Thorne studied the tactical displays, his mind working through countless permutations of attack and defense. The enemy held significant advantages: surprise, exotic technology, and apparent immunity to conventional weapons. But the Empire had advantages too: superior numbers in the long term, detailed knowledge of local space, and a technological base that had absorbed the best innovations from hundreds of different species. What about intelligence on their command structure? He asked. Limited but promising, Vex replied. Agent Nix's final transmission included data on their hierarchy. They appear to operate under a theocratic model, priests who serve as both military commanders and spiritual leaders. At the top is someone they call the Supreme Darkness, though whether this is an individual, a collective consciousness, or something else entirely remains unclear. A new alarm chimed through the command center. Captain Vasquez's hands flew over her control interfaces, pulling up real-time sensor data from the Empire's deep space monitoring network. Admiral, she called, her voice tight with tension. We're detecting massive quantum disturbances at the edge of the detection grid. Sector Null is showing energy readings off the scale. The central display shifted to show the empty region beyond the Empire's borders. What had been void now crawled with dark energy patterns that hurt to look at directly. Space itself seemed to writhe and twist as something vast prepared to emerge from dimensional fold space. Time to emergence? Based on the energy build-up, 67 hours 32 minutes. Close enough to their original estimate to be worrying, far enough off to suggest that either their intelligence was incomplete or the enemy was adapting their timeline. Orders, sir? General Kane asked. Thorne looked around the command center at the faces of men and women who had dedicated their lives to protecting the Empire. Some showed fear, others excitement, but all demonstrated the unwavering determination that had built a civilization spanning 47 galaxies. We fight, he said simply. Signal all commands. Operation Darkfall is now active. Deploy the Shadow Fleet to forward positions. Activate civilian evacuation protocols for the primary target worlds. And, he paused, the weight of command heavy on his shoulders. Prepare the reality anchors for emergency activation. As the command center erupted into coordinated activity, Thorn found himself staring at the tactical display showing the approaching threat. Somewhere in that writhing mass of dark energy was an enemy that sought not just to conquer but to fundamentally alter the nature of existence itself. The Empire had survived the hegemony wars, the AI rebellion, and the dimensional cascade. It had grown strong through adversity and wise through experience. But this would be different. This would be a war not just for territory or resources, but for the very right to exist in a reality governed by comprehensible physical laws. Admiral, Director Vex's hologram approached him. There's something else. Agent Nix's final transmission contained a warning about their ultimate goal. The Great Convergence isn't just about merging realities. It's about creating a new universal order where the fundamental constants of physics serve their will. If they succeed, science itself becomes meaningless. Thorn finished. A universe where the laws of nature can be rewritten by those with sufficient will or faith. Exactly. Which means this isn't just a military conflict. It's a philosophical one. Order versus chaos, logic versus mysticism, the predictable universe versus one where reality shifts according to belief. Thorn nodded grimly. The stakes couldn't be higher. The Empire had always prided itself on its rational approach to governance and expansion, building its power through scientific advancement and logical organization. Now they faced an enemy that seemed to operate according to entirely different principles. Then we'd better make sure we win, he said. The ISV Prometheus cut through the dark between stars like a blade through silk, its advanced stealth systems rendering it nearly invisible to conventional sensors. Director Cassandra Vex stood in the ship's intelligence center, watching as her analysts worked to decode the final transmissions from Agent Nix. Nix had been one of the Umbral Division's most capable operatives, a woman who could become anyone, infiltrate anywhere, and extract information from the most secure locations. Her loss was not just tactical but personal. Vex had recruited her personally 15 years ago from the wreckage of a failed colony world. Director, called Lieutenant Torres, the division's chief cryptographer. We've managed to clean up the final portion of Agent Nix's transmission. You need to see this. The holographic display shifted to show what appeared to be the interior of the massive cathedral fortress. The architecture was wrong in ways that made human minds struggle to process it. Corridors that seemed to extend infinitely while simultaneously feeling claustrophobic, chambers where the walls curved in directions that shouldn't exist, and everywhere the strange non-light that absorbed photons rather than reflecting them. At the center of the largest chamber stood figures that barely qualified as humanoid. The Void Priests were tall and angular, their proportions somehow disturbing despite appearing anatomically correct. Their robes moved independently of any wind, and their faces, when visible, showed features that shifted and blurred as if reality couldn't quite decide what they should look like. But it was their leader that drew attention like a magnet draws iron. The being that stood at the center of the ritual circle was clearly the supreme darkness that their intelligence had referenced. If the other priests were unsettling, this entity was actively hostile to perception itself. Looking at it directly caused the recording equipment to stutter and distort, while peripheral vision revealed only a vague impression of immense presence and barely contained power. Audio enhancement, Vex ordered. The voices that emerged from the enhanced recording were not quite human. They carried harmonics that seemed to resonate in dimensions beyond normal hearing, creating an effect that was both mesmerizing and deeply disturbing. The convergence approaches. The supreme darkness intoned, its voice like the death of stars. Reality grows thin, and the barriers between what is and what should be weaken with each passing moment. The Empire's fleet strength? Asked one of the other priests. Irrelevant. Their weapons are designed for a universe bound by the illusion of fixed physical laws. When the convergence begins, their technology will become as useless as prayers to dead gods. And the ritual components? The void crystals are in position. The reality wounds have been prepared. When our fleets engage the Empire's forces, their weapons' fire will provide the necessary catalyst for the dimensional breach. Each ship they destroy, each life they take, will feed power into the convergence matrix. Vex felt cold dread settling in her stomach. If she understood correctly, the enemy was planning to use the Empire's own defensive actions as fuel for their reality-altering ritual. How long will the transformation take? Another priest inquired. Once begun, the process will cascade across this galaxy cluster within 72 hours. Every world, every system, every particle of matter will be reformed according to our design. The empire that has spread like a cancer across the cosmos will find their ordered reality replaced by one where will and faith shape the fundamental forces. The recording began to break up as Agent Nix's position was discovered, but one final exchange was audible. And afterwards? Afterwards, we begin preparation for the greater convergence. This galaxy cluster is merely the first step. When we have perfected our techniques here, we will spread the transformation across the entire universe. Reality itself will become our domain. The transmission ended in static and the unmistakable sound of weapons fire. Vex stood in silence for several minutes, processing the implications. This wasn't just an invasion, it was a plan for the systematic transformation of reality itself. The enemy wasn't seeking to conquer the Empire, they were seeking to remake the universe in their image. Director? Lieutenant Torres prompted gently. Prepare a priority transmission to Admiral Thorne, Vex said, her voice steady despite the magnitude of what they had learned. Full encryption, quantum channel priority alpha. As the communication link established, Vex found herself staring out at the stars visible through the ship's observation ports. Each point of light represented a sun, possibly with planets, possibly with life, all existing in a universe governed by predictable physical laws. If the enemy succeeded, none of that would matter. The cosmos would become a place where reality shifted according to the will of those with sufficient power to impose their vision. Lysander, she said when the connection completed, we have new intelligence. The situation is worse than we thought. How much worse? Came Thorne's immediate reply. They're not planning to invade us. They're planning to remake us. Our universe, our reality, our fundamental physical laws, everything we understand about existence itself is their target. A pause. Then, recommendations? We can't fight this conventionally. Every ship we destroy, every weapon we fire, feeds power into their ritual matrix. The more we resist using normal tactics, the stronger they become. Then what do you suggest? Vex had been considering this since the recording ended. The answer was both obvious and terrifying. We have to attack them before they begin. Strike first, hit them where they're vulnerable, and prevent the convergence from starting. No defensive actions, no protective stances. We go on the offensive immediately and don't stop until either they're destroyed or we are. The Shadow Fleet? All of it. Plus every experimental weapon, every classified project, every piece of exotic technology we've been keeping in reserve. This isn't the time for measured responses or graduated escalation. This is the time for everything we have. Another pause. What about civilian evacuation? Continue the preparations, but don't count on them being effective. If we fail to stop the convergence, there won't be anywhere to evacuate to. The enemy will remake every particle of matter in this galaxy cluster according to their design. Understood. Return to Celestia Prime immediately. We'll need your intelligence assets for what comes next. Already en route. Prometheus will dock in 14 hours. Good. Vex. Thorne's voice carried unusual warmth. Whatever happens in the next few days, remember that the Empire has faced impossible odds before. We've always found a way. This is different, Lysander. This enemy doesn't want to conquer us. They want to transform us into something unrecognizable. If we lose this fight, humanity as we know it ceases to exist. Then we won't lose. The transmission ended, leaving Vex alone with her thoughts and the terrible knowledge of what they faced. Outside the observation ports, the stars continued to shine with steady light, unaware that their very existence hung in the balance. In the deepest levels of Celestia Prime, beneath layers of security protocols and reality shielding that could withstand the collapse of the star system itself, lay the Empire's most closely guarded secret, Facility Omega. Admiral Thorne passed through 17 different security checkpoints, each one scanning not just his physical form but his quantum signature, neural patterns, and temporal consistency. By the time he reached the central chamber, even his closest associates would have difficulty recognizing him as the same person who had entered. The chamber beyond the final security barrier defied easy description. It existed partially outside normal space-time, its walls shifting between solid matter and pure energy according to principles that the Empire's best scientists still didn't fully understand. 12 vessel bays lined the chamber's perimeter, each one containing a ship that represented years of research into technologies that conventional physics insisted should be impossible. General Kane stood before the largest bay, where a sleek vessel of impossible angles and surfaces that seemed to bend light around them waited in ready status. The Void Walker was beautiful in an alien way, its hull crafted from materials that existed in multiple dimensions simultaneously. "Status report," Thorne said as he approached. "All 15 Shadow Fleet vessels are operational. Crews have been briefed on their specific missions and equipped with reality anchors in case the enemy attempts dimensional manipulation during combat." Thorne studied the nearest vessel, the Phantom. Its hull appeared almost translucent, shifting between visibility and complete absence as its cloaking systems cycled through different phases of activation. "Crew morale? High. These men and women volunteered for the Shadow Fleet knowing they might be asked to test technologies that could kill them in ways that conventional medicine couldn't treat. They understand the stakes. And the weapons systems?" Kane gestured toward a series of tactical displays that showed specifications for armaments that officially didn't exist. "The Paradox carries temporal destabilization cannons, weapons that can age a target several thousand years in seconds. The Nightfall mounts reality manipulation devices that can temporarily alter local physics to make enemy ships cease to exist. The Whisper carries experimental consciousness transfer weapons that can evacuate the minds from enemy vessels while leaving the ships intact. Theoretical effectiveness against the enemy? Unknown. We're fighting beings that apparently operate outside conventional physical laws using weapons designed to circumvent those same laws. It's possible we'll cancel each other out. It's equally possible we'll tear holes in reality that take centuries to repair." Thorne nodded grimly. The Shadow Fleet represented the Empire's best attempt to fight fire with fire, exotic technology against exotic technology, impossible weapons against impossible enemies. "Timeline? The fleet can launch within 6 hours. Transit time to the enemy's staging area is approximately 18 hours using our fastest dimensional skip drives. That puts us at the enemy position roughly 4 hours before their scheduled attack begins. Assuming their timeline remains unchanged. Our intelligence suggests they may be accelerating their plans in response to our mobilization." A soft chime indicated an incoming priority transmission. Director Vex's hologram materialized beside them, her expression grim. "Admiral, we have a problem. Long-range sensors are detecting massive energy discharges from the enemy's staging area. They appear to be beginning the convergence ritual ahead of schedule." Thorne felt ice form in his veins. "How much ahead of schedule?" "Best estimate puts the ritual commencement at 26 hours from now. If they maintain their current acceleration rate, they could begin the dimensional breach in as little as 18 hours. Kane swore colorfully in 3 different languages. "That eliminates our window for a preemptive strike. By the time we reach their position, the convergence will already be underway." "Not necessarily," Thorne said, his mind racing through alternatives. "What if we don't wait for the fleet to reach them conventionally?" "Sir? The Paradox's temporal manipulation systems. Could they be used to accelerate our entire task force through time?" Kane and Vex exchanged looks of alarm. "Theoretically possible," Kane admitted slowly. "But the energy requirements would be enormous. And the risks? The risks of trying versus the risks of failure?" "Point taken. But even if we could accelerate the entire fleet, there's no guarantee we'd arrive when we intended. Temporal manipulation at that scale has never been attempted. We could emerge too early and disrupt the timeline, or too late and find ourselves in the middle of a transformed reality." Thorne studied the tactical displays, considering alternatives. Every option carried enormous risks. but the consequences of inaction were worse than any potential failure. What about a two-pronged approach? Vex suggested. Send the Shadow Fleet ahead using conventional propulsion, while simultaneously preparing a second wave using temporal acceleration. If the first wave fails or arrives too late, the second wave serves as backup. Dividing our forces in the face of superior enemy numbers, Kane observed, versus concentrating them and losing everything if our primary plan fails, Thorne countered. At least this way we have redundancy. Admiral, came a new voice from the chamber's entrance. Captain Elena Vasquez approached rapidly, her expression indicating urgent news. We're receiving reports from our deep space monitoring stations. The enemy fleet has begun to phase into normal space-time. Current estimates put their strength at over 400 vessels. The tactical situation had just become significantly worse. 400 ships of unknown capability against 15 Shadow Fleet vessels and whatever conventional forces they could muster in time. Conventional fleet status? Thorne asked. 67 vessels in ready status, another 43 that could be prepared within 12 hours. But sir, given what we know about the enemy's phasing capabilities, conventional weapons may be useless, Thorne finished. Which brings us back to the Shadow Fleet and temporal acceleration. There is another option, Kane said slowly. The reality anchors. If we can't stop the convergence from beginning, perhaps we can limit its scope. Explain. Position the reality anchor stations in a containment configuration around the enemy's staging area. When they activate the convergence, we immediately activate the anchors. Instead of allowing the transformation to cascade across the galaxy cluster, we trap it in a localized area, creating a permanent dead zone where nothing can exist, Vex added, including ourselves if we're caught inside it when the anchors activate. Better a dead zone than a reality transformed according to their design, Thorne said. But it's a last resort. Our primary objective remains stopping the convergence before it begins. He looked around the chamber at the Shadow Fleet vessels, each one representing humanity's best attempt to transcend the limitations of conventional technology. They were beautiful, terrible, and completely untested against an enemy like this. General Kane, begin immediate launch preparations for the Shadow Fleet. Director Vex, coordinate with the reality anchor stations and prepare contingency protocols for emergency activation. Captain Vasquez, signal all conventional fleets to adopt maximum defensive postures around the core worlds. And the temporal acceleration option? Kane asked. Prepare it as a backup. If the Shadow Fleet fails or arrives too late, we'll attempt to send a second wave using the Paradox's systems. It may kill everyone involved, but at this point, that's an acceptable risk. As the chamber erupted into coordinated activity, Thorne found himself staring at the Void Walker. In its impossible angles and reality-bending hull, he saw a reflection of what the Empire had become, a civilization that had grown so advanced that it had begun to transcend the natural order itself. Perhaps that was why they faced this threat now. The Empire had pushed the boundaries of what was possible until they had attracted the attention of beings that existed beyond those boundaries entirely. Sir? Kane prompted. Launch the Shadow Fleet, Thorne commanded. It's time to see what our impossible weapons can do against an impossible enemy. Space itself screamed. The dimensional breach opened like a wound in reality, its edges writhing with energies that hurt to perceive directly. Through the tear stepped ships that belonged to no rational universe, vessels whose very existence was an assault on the ordered cosmos. Admiral Thorne watched from the command center on Celestia Prime as the enemy fleet emerged from fold space. The Shadow Fleet had launched 6 hours ago, racing toward an intercept course with the mysterious enemy armada. But now, watching the impossible vessels phase in and out of visible reality, he wondered if even their exotic weapons would be sufficient. Enemy fleet composition? He asked Captain Vasquez. 437 vessels confirmed, sir. The classification system is struggling to process their configurations. They don't conform to any known engineering principles. On the tactical display, the enemy's ships appeared as shifting, uncertain shapes that seemed to exist in several dimensions simultaneously. Some resembled traditional spacecraft, albeit with proportions and angles that created optical illusions. Others defied description entirely, appearing more like geometric concepts given physical form than actual vehicles. Energy signatures? Off the charts, sir. They're drawing power from sources our sensors can't identify. Quantum mechanics, zero-point energy, dimensional tap, none of our theories adequately explain what we're seeing. Director Vex's hologram materialized beside them, transmitted from the intelligence vessel Prometheus as it maintained position near the Reality Anchor Station network. Admiral, we're detecting massive gravitational distortions around the enemy fleet. They're doing something to local space-time that's causing our long-range sensors to malfunction. The convergence ritual? Preliminary stages, based on Agent Nix's intelligence. They're creating what our analysts are calling reality soft spots, areas where the fundamental constants of physics become negotiable. Thorne studied the expanding zone of distorted space surrounding the enemy fleet. Within that area, their sensors reported impossible readings, light traveling at variable speeds, gravity flowing in directions that didn't exist, and matter existing in quantum states that should have been mutually exclusive. Time to Shadow Fleet intercept? 11 hours, 43 minutes at current acceleration, Vasquez reported. But sir, if the enemy continues to expand that zone of distorted physics, our ships could find themselves operating in an environment where their technology doesn't work properly. Thorne finished. Signal the Shadow Fleet, proceed with maximum caution and be prepared to retreat if local physics become too unstable to maintain ship integrity. Admiral, came a new voice from across the command center. Lieutenant Commander Sarachin, the Empire's chief xenotechnology specialist, approached with a data pad displaying readings that made no sense according to conventional science. We've been analyzing the enemy ship's phase variance patterns, she reported. There's a correlation between their dimensional state and their weapons capability. When they're fully phased into our reality, they can affect our ships but become vulnerable to our weapons. When they're partially phased, they're nearly invulnerable but can only deliver limited attacks. A tactical weakness? Potentially. If we can force them to choose between offense and defense, we might be able to exploit the transition periods when they're moving between phase states. It was the first encouraging news they've received since the crisis began. Thorne felt a flicker of hope that their technological superiority might still provide an advantage. Relay that information to the Shadow Fleet immediately. And prepare tactical scenarios based on forced phase transitions. Sir, Captain Vasquez called urgently. We're receiving a transmission from the enemy fleet. It's addressed to you personally. Thorne frowned. Put it through. The main display shifted to show a figure that barely qualified as humanoid. The entity wore robes that seemed to absorb light itself, and its face, when visible, showed features that shifted constantly as if reality couldn't decide what they should look like. When it spoke, its voice carried harmonics that resonated in dimensions beyond normal hearing. Admiral Lysander Thorne of the Intergalactic Empire. The being intoned, its words seeming to arrive directly in their minds rather than through their ears. I am Morpheus the Void Speaker, Herald of the Supreme Darkness. You have been judged. Judged for what? Thorne replied, his voice steady despite the cosmic scope of the threat he faced. Your species has spread across the galaxies like a plague, imposing your limited understanding of reality upon countless worlds. You mistake order for truth, logic for wisdom, and science for ultimate knowledge. This ends now. We've brought peace, prosperity, and advancement to thousands of species. You have brought stagnation, Morpheus interrupted. A universe frozen in rigid adherence to arbitrary physical laws. Reality constrained by the limitations of your primitive understanding. The Supreme Darkness offers liberation from these chains. Liberation through destruction? Liberation through transformation. When the Great Convergence is complete, your empire will still exist, but it will exist as it should have always existed, unbound by the illusion of fixed physical constants. Thorne felt a chill as he grasped the full implication. You're not trying to destroy us. You're trying to convert us. Finally, understanding. Every world in your empire will be remade according to the true nature of reality, fluid, responsive, shaped by will rather than constrained by dead matter following dead laws. Your ships will sail on currents of thought. Your soldiers will be limited only by the strength of their faith. Your scientists will discover that imagination is the only force that matters. And those who refuse this liberation will find that their refusal is irrelevant. The convergence cannot be stopped, only delayed. Already, the ritual components are in place. Already, reality grows thin in preparation for transformation. Your weapon's fire will provide the final catalyst needed to begin the cascade. The transmission ended, leaving the command center in stunned silence. He's bluffing, Director Vex said, though her voice lacked conviction. They need us to fight them. If we don't engage, then they'll attack the civilian populations until we do, Thorne finished. Either way, we end up giving them what they need. The reality anchors, Vasquez suggested. If we activate them now, before the convergence begins, we'd destroy every inhabited system in a dozen galaxies, Thorne replied. The cure would be worse than the disease. Sir, Lieutenant Commander Chen called from her station. I'm detecting energy spikes from the enemy fleet. The phase variance is increasing. They're beginning some kind of coordinated maneuver. On the tactical display, the enemy's ships began to move in patterns that defied conventional understanding of spaceflight. They didn't accelerate or decelerate in any recognizable way. Instead, they simply appeared to relocate themselves through space as if distance were merely a suggestion rather than a physical constraint. Formation analysis? They're arranging themselves in a three-dimensional mandala pattern around several key points in space. Based on the energy readings, those points correspond to the locations where reality is thinnest, natural weak spots in the fabric of space-time. The ritual sites, Bex observed. They're positioning themselves to channel energy into the convergence matrix. Thorne made a decision that would echo across the galaxy. Signal the Shadow Fleet, emergency acceleration, full power to engines. Signal all conventional fleets, converge on the enemy formation at maximum speed. And, he paused, knowing that his next words might doom them all. Activate the reality anchors and prepare for emergency deployment. Sir, the Shadow Fleet won't reach the enemy position for another 10 hours. The conventional fleets will take even longer. Then we buy them time. Signal the outer defense stations, commence immediate bombardment of the enemy formation. All available weapons, all available power. But sir, their own transmission indicated that weapons fire would feed energy into their ritual matrix. And if we do nothing, they complete the ritual anyway. At least this way, we force them to accelerate their timeline and potentially make mistakes. Across the Empire, defense installations that had stood guard over peaceful worlds for centuries suddenly came alive with deadly purpose. Massive energy cannons that could crack planets swiveled to target the distant enemy fleet. Missile batteries launched volleys that could devastate entire star systems. Particle beam arrays that had never been fired in anger reached across impossible distances to deliver concentrated destruction. And with each weapon that fired, each explosion that bloomed against the enemy ship's exotic shielding, reality grew a little thinner. The fundamental constants that held the universe together began to fluctuate as the Void Priest's ritual matrix absorbed the released energy, and transformed it into something that could reshape existence itself. The Great Convergence had begun.